broken record when it comes to Oklahoma State, because I'm sure that, people who cover Oklahoma State extensively know that there's definitely a lot of pressure riding on this season, right? I mean, obviously the Cowboys in Stillwater, they have a certain standard, and it was just simply that a lot of things didn't go their way, right? They won their first 3 games of the year. They pretty much fell off a cliff and lost their next 9. First time since 2000 that they haven't won a single conference game. So it definitely brings a lot of eyes to the program. And really, it was kind of a turbulent offseason for him in the sense that, well, Oklahoma State had the leverage to make Mike Gundy take a pay cut. That's probably first and foremost. Secondarily, they pretty much wiped out a lot of their coaching staff as well. I mean, when you look at the additions that they brought in Doug Mercham, who was with TCU last season, who I think is going to be a really solid hire for a number of reasons. TCU, much like what Mike Gundy likes to do, they're going to really do a solid job at really getting more guys being able to develop. They're going to be passing the ball a lot more of that air raid kind of style that we would love to see with the Cowboys. I mean, I go back and I remember, Brandon Weeden and Justin Blackmon, for example. That duo was always so much fun to watch. So there is a historical element of it too, where I sit there and say to myself, hey, I just want to see Oklahoma State just, sling the ball a little bit and at least play some borderline defense where they would actually, be able to put themselves in more games, because even when they were consistently winning 9 games, as recent as a couple seasons ago, that was always their Achilles heel, right? Is the fact that if they just played an ounce of defense whatsoever, particularly within, the passing game, for example, it just kind of makes you wonder what they'd be able to do. Because I think what is so special about Oklahoma State is, they don't have all the luxuries that some of these other Big 12 schools have. And so, for example, when Oklahoma State's particularly in the recruiting aspect, they're mainly targeting guys, from smaller schools like the South Dakotas of the world, a little bit of in-state. I mean, this year it's about roughly 20% that's in-state. So they've really, kind of went the route of, hey, we're going to poach kids from smaller schools, in Texas and the Dakotas and in Arizona, for example, and even California, where, they're going to be saying to themselves, hey, we know we can't really compete with the Texas and the Sooners and all that kind of stuff. So how can we kind of pivot in a little bit of a different way? And, you even see that going into the recruiting rankings as well. I mean, this year, obviously, you were expecting a little bit of turbulence when it comes to recruiting. They're 40th as of the 2025 class. That's definitely pretty encouraging. 22 commits, 40 transfers. So it's definitely going to be a little bit transfer heavy again. But again, I think we're seeing that in the coaching staff as well. A lot of the coordinators that are coming in are brand new. A lot of the support staff as well. Very similar aspect too. I'll get into Todd Granham in a second afterwards. But even 2024, we look and they were ranked about 50th there. Again, mainly 3-star guys, but you go into 2023 and they're 55th. Then you go into 2022 and they're 24th. So it's a lot of more or less of, we already kind of know what we expect from them, right? Oklahoma State, at the end of the day, they're not going to be the type of program that's going to be turning heads in terms of how much money that they're raising, in terms of really, blue chip recruits, for example. Their bread and butter, their pitch is going to be, hey, we have a culture of showcasing talent that we know that we can take you to the next level if you decide to take that journey with us. And, I love Mike Gundy too. I think what always excites me about him is he's just so blunt and so truthful, perhaps even to a fault, where, he is just that type of dude where he's just, I think for first and foremost, the guy's a freaking winner, right? I mean, he's won pretty much majority of his career. He's been pretty loyal to this program. I mean, I'm sure he's maybe had a handful of offers, I'm sure, in the early 2000s, perhaps, where where he wasn't as seasoned, but you're at the point now where I think still people in Stillwater are just going to kind of say to themselves, hey, is this going to be a similar situation where we're just going to see Oklahoma State just get worse and worse, or are they not really going to come back and really be where they're at? But I mean, at the same time too, that's what's kind of tough about talking about this program too, because I think a lot of people, particularly within Stillwater, for example, don't appreciate the amount of consistent success that they've had. Because I know you talk with a lot of other programs, for example, and some people get pissed off at the fact that they're only winning 8 or 9 games as opposed to 10 or 11. And at the same time, sometimes that's okay. That's kind of the ceiling or the peak, depending on what you're going for necessarily. But at the same time, too, one thing I love about covering the Big 12 Conference is that it's always open every year. Even the past 4 seasons, there's always been a new winner. So it's you kind of sit there and say to yourself, well, nobody's really out of it. Because I know even last year I was pretty high on this Oklahoma State team. They had a lot of seniors returning. You had Ollie Gordon coming back, and that obviously didn't really all pan out too, which, going into this season, they're going to have to rely on a lot of Flores. He's going to be an interesting cat to watch this season. He's athletic. He's got a solid arm. He's definitely going to be a project, but out of all the people who I think can kind of make this happen, I think the team of Mike Gundy and Doug Mercham are really going to be solid for him. And, the wide receiver core, yes, they've brought in a handful of transfers, and it's one of those things where my main concern is the offensive line. I mean, the offensive line definitely had their struggles last season, and obviously on both sides of the ball, obviously depth was a big issue, right? They had a big injury bug, and it just kind of sit there and makes you wonder, how long is this turnaround really going to take? Because I just based on what I'm seeing right now in general, this to me just feels like more of a 2 to 3 season kind of rebuild, as opposed to, okay, Oklahoma State, they had their 3-9 season. It's a one-off, and then they're just going to walk off to the sunset again and continue winning 8-9 games as usual, or what the standard is. But at the same time, too, when I look on the defense side of the ball, you can't help but at least be a little bit nervous. I mean, I mentioned Todd Granahan a couple seconds ago, and granted, I'm throw it out there. I definitely am a little bit biased just because I've experienced firsthand Todd Granahan's defense pretty much plummet a program. Now, granted, you can argue that Dan Mullen obviously didn't, take the necessary steps to fire him, but in any event, it's positive that he has a really well-experienced staff, right? And for a program that's going to be relying primarily on underclassmen and a lot of key positions, it's going to help in that regard. But at the same time, when you look at some of Granaham's defenses historically in the past couple stops, yeah, it's hard for me to be able to confidently and sit there and say, yeah, he's going to resolve he's going to resolve the pass rush that hasn't been relevant or hasn't been a threat at all in the past couple seasons. Yeah, their teams aren't going to be able to sit there and run the ball all over our defense again. It's just, I just think that they could have went after some other coordinators that I think could have had a little bit more upside. I think Granaham's one of those guys where I guess you can kind of throw the retread word out there, I suppose, but I just imagine this hiring being more of a problem than a solution, especially in the next couple seasons too. And I guess my one big criticism of Mike Gundy in general is, even if you go back and look at some of his other coordinator hires, he's never been afraid to be the type of guy that turns some heads, that makes you kind of question what's going on or why is he doing that. But I've always admired about him that he wears his heart in his sleeve, and at the end of the day, he beats to his own drum. And I think this program's be one of those things where it almost could be to a fault. Now, granted, do I think Oklahoma State was ever seriously going to fire him? No. I think it was more of a just back and forth. Hey, the fans are pissed off. We didn't win a conference game this year. I think they just more or less kind of used some leverage to be able to get him to take a pay cut a little bit. And then granted, I'm sure some of those funds ended up going back into the program anyway. So it's probably more or less a win-win, right? But I go into the schedule a little bit, and there's going to be some tough sledding here, particularly at the beginning of the season. They have to travel to Eugene, Oregon, September 6th. That's always going to be a tough game, and I wouldn't be surprised that one gets ugly pretty quick. And then you have a bye right after, which is obviously not ideal. I mean, you would obviously hope that that's going to be a little bit later into the season, but you do have a pretty solid home schedule. I mean, you're going to play a really tough Baylor team who is really strong right now, especially with Jake Spadeval. You have Dave Renata running the defense, and that has been a really nice turnaround. You have kind of a softy game versus Arizona that I think you can kind of come back, and then you play Houston and Cincinnati too, all winnable games. But I think overall, it's games that they can win, but it's also easily games that they can screw up, because even when I look a little bit further down the line, I think this 3-game stretch is going to be a little bit nerve-wracking. I mean, I sit there and say, okay, you're going to have to go and visit Texas Tech. Then the week after, you're going to visit Kansas, which I think Kansas is going to be one of the most improved teams in the entire Big 12. And then after that bye, you face Kansas State right after. And for anybody who hasn't watched Avery Johnson this season or last season, you need to watch him, because the kid's a dog. He's legit, and he's going to be somebody that we're going to be talking about at least for the next season or two, because I think that kid is really something special. And, Chris Kleiman is one of the most consistent coaches in all of college football. So I think that's another game that you have to be at least a little bit apprehensive about. But overall, I mean, there's definitely going to be some issues, some growing pains, let's say. I mean, I talked about the run defense. It absolutely needs to be better. I mean, they've allowed 300 yards or more 3 times and allowed 3 or more touchdowns 7 times last season. The depth's going to be tested again, particularly in the secondary. I mean, they have a couple guys. I really like Brian McCoy, who's a linebacker senior. I like Malik Charles on the edge too. So I think that part of it could also help a little bit too. And then obviously Tyron Duhan, who's going to be an edge sophomore, and I think somebody who can really help their pass rush as well. But overall, Oklahoma State, I think they're just going to have to be in a situation where I think fans are just going to have to be a little bit more patient, whether they like it or not. Now, granted, I think that's kind of the stuff that people don't want to hear, but at the same time, too, Mike Gundy, he bleeds Oklahoma State football. The passion, the excitement, I think is going to come back. I think the people there love Cowboy football, and I know that they're going to figure it out eventually. I just don't know it's going to be this season.